you've got this very, very, very clear protection. And I can't stress that enough. If there was one thing we got right in those 8 years, it was that bill. And that bill says words like you can't build any structure. Fast forward to a number of initiatives we've seen. Certainly not going to highlight any because it's better or worse than others, but the monastery at Mary Lake, of course, many of you will know, was subject to a planning application. And there's a continued debate about this. Very continued and heated debate. But the position taken by the Ministry of Long-Term Care is that there never has been a long-term care operation there. And without that use, it's illegal to add one now. And just because a couple of old priests live there doesn't make it a long-term care home. And I'm not here to get on a sidebar, but that's the sort of thing where intuitively you might say, well, there were always old people living there. I guess it's the same as a long-term care home, except we have an act, a different act, that clearly defines what is and is not a long-term care home. And if you don't meet that definition, none of us in this room and nobody else, the premier doesn't get to say, well, yeah, but I think. It's crystal clear. Now, the province can amend laws. Absolutely. It's one of the first things you learn in politics is no government can bind its successor. I would submit to you that any government that decides to water down the Oak Ridge Moraine or undo Algonquin Park, or get rid of the Niagara Escarpment, won't be winning the election after that. They could do it, but I suspect somebody will undo what they've undone first chance they get.
Yeah, Susan?
Yes.
Thank you. The Mary Lake issue is high on quite a number of people's radars here in King. And I know that no application has actually been, I understand that no application has actually been submitted. But there's a great vacuum and silence with reference to a decision or a ruling or an opinion or something that says, was there a home there before ORM legislation or was there not? It seems to me that yay or nay is the crux of the matter for further development. So you did mention that a body that I didn't get the name of has quite definitely ruled, opined something that it was indeed not a long-term home. So could you expand a little more on that? Because a lot of us are concerned.
Happy to do that, but I'm also I'd like to put it in the context that again, I'm not here to stray into your municipal affairs, but I am quite happy in the context of the act to tell you what my understanding is. And thanks to Sue and Tom and others, I've been made privy to some of the background in all of this. I spoke to Minister Phillips when he was still the Minister of Long-Term Care and to his predecessor, the staff of his predecessor. And they've confirmed there has never been an actual long-term care license issued at that site. The significance of using the word license is that's how things are referred to. That's how we differentiate those things that are covered by what used to be called the Nursing Home Act and the Long-Term Care Act. You can do things, you can have elderly people, you could even have palliative care, you could have a nurse coming in every day. That doesn't convey a right or a use to you in a planning context. And let me give you a comparable example. You could have a farmhouse on the Moraine. And if you were operating a bed and breakfast in 2000, you can operate a bed and breakfast today. But the fact that you have a house that has bedrooms and a kitchen, if you did not have a bed and breakfast on November 15th, 2001, you can't add that use today.
Even if you say you intended to?
No.
Really? Interesting.
No. And besides, and it took you, we were having very spirited discussions along that line in 2001 and 2002 and 2003. Even by the time we lost in 2003, I would say that train has left the station. Nobody credibly can say, yeah, I went into the township and I was talking to some person at the counter. So yeah, I sort of asked. And you took 2 years to get back to understand that the law 2 years ago said you can't do this anymore. To suggest it 21 years later, I think is farcical. It is truly farcical. And so either there is documentation, Susan, and I would be the first to flip completely. If you could show something that said, here is a payment from the Ministry of Health for a specific service that could be defined as long-term care. Not first aid, not I came in to clean the bedrooms. I provide cleaning services for the elderly priests.
Not even applying Band-Aids.
That again, that's first aid. Do I get to call myself a hospital? I'm only being partially facetious when I say that. I could give you 50 examples of things I've probably done on my farm, metal working of some kind, but just because I fabricated something for a horse trailer, or I fixed something, that doesn't make me a machine shop. And so I can do things for my farm equipment, but I can't set up a business and advertise and say, come on in with your tractors, I'm going to fix them. I can't do that. If I had been doing it November 14th, 2001, absolutely. And it doesn't even, and actually there's a second clause, and continuously since then. So that's the other kicker. So even if you do have documents that say you were doing this in 2001, you better come in with a document saying I was doing it in 2002 and 2003 and 2004. And again, I don't mean that to sound so autocratic and dictatorial. Could there be a gap of a year or two? That's not the issue. If you said you were doing, maybe they all died off, sorry to phrase it that way, but maybe there's a gap of a year or two where there were no priests living in the monastery who needed that care. But then as soon as others reached a certain age, the service was provided. We have in fact heard from Marion Homes, who is going to be the developer, that they were the people providing that first aid. So the people that were going in there doing that rudimentary health step are the people saying there was never a long-term care facility here. And it's in their advantage to say that because they wanted to build a long-term care home. They have since, is my understanding, withdrawn their interest on that site, and they're looking for another site, which creates a different challenge for the municipality and for the developer. Because without the proof that there is actually a client, then the rules attendant to the government's awarding of beds are tied to the client. They're not tied to the geography. You don't get to say, oh, somebody once came here and said this would be a lovely spot to build a long-term care home. It has to be somebody that says, I just won an award from the province for 140 beds, and I want to be at this particular location. That's the linkage that the developer has to be able to prove to again, have a long-term care developed on that site. So it's my understanding there no longer is a proponent. There never was a historical use. If there is documentation, it has been refused to Tom Butt and maybe others. I don't know. But Tom, I know has filed freedom of information request. I know because he's told me. And as an example of that broad restriction I talked about earlier, I don't see how anybody can move forward on that site. So they can continue to do the things they were doing. You can have a monastery. You can have the other religious aspects of that property, no problem. And they can fix it up. There's nothing in the act that says if the brickwork is crumbling. Obviously, that was never part of it. A farmhouse can be maintained, a barn can be maintained, those sorts of things. But it's a pretty hard and fast rule. And I struggle to see how anybody could rationalize going around that. So
That's good news.
That's great news. But nobody told us that.